This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by D. Harlan Wilson, David, who is the author of Strangelove Country, Science Fiction, Filmosophy and the Kubrickian Consciousness. Thank you for joining me, David.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Snap. We've both held up our copies. We've both held up our copies of the book. Now, I have to say, first of all, that this is like so in my wheelhouse. I love Stanley Kubrick, but I also love science fiction, and I also love the way you look very, very deeply into cinema and the crossovers between cinema and literature. So congratulations on the book. And I also have to say, I really love the way you treat your subject in a way which straddles the academic and the imaginative and the creative. It's sort of there's moments of novelistic feel to the book.
Thank you. As I said, I think in the last email I sent you, I appreciate your appreciation of the creative liberties that I took with this book. And some people, not just in Kubrick studies, but in general, aren't too keen on creative liberties of this nature. Although I don't think they're particularly amplified compared to some other books that I've done. In fact, they're quite marginalized, but because in many ways the book is structured like a formal scholarly monograph. But it was largely my creativity, I guess, was largely enabled by Daniel Frampton's monograph, Filmosophy, which is sort of the operating theoretical apparatus that I apply to Kubrick's cinema. Yeah. But again, as I said in that email, that creative impetus can rub some people the wrong way, but people who are into it really tend to love it.
Yeah, I always feel that it's a sort of, emperor's no clothes sort of situation where when you're using a creative thing, you've got to make sure the emperor's got some clothes on.
Yeah.
In other words, you've got to kind of have the infrastructure as well as the style and the thing, or it's got to be somehow bound together so that it feels necessary. And I think your book does that. It can't just be like, I'm going to express it in this sort of jaunty way, and the things I'm expressing aren't particularly interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like I got lucky in the way in which everything did kind of come together, because my point of departure wasn't with Frampton. I wanted to look at, and I mentioned this in the introduction in some depth, I wanted to look at Kubrick's futurist cinema, specifically in terms of desire as it's been theorized by various, what I call, and have been called, theory punks, the likes of, above all, Deleuze. And I applied a specific type of desire to each of Kubrick's futurist films: Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, and then finally AI, artificial intelligence, which he worked on for years with Spielberg, and then Spielberg ended up doing the film. So I started conceiving of the book in terms of applying a specific type of desire to each of those films. And then I brought in Frampton's, that theoretical apparatus of filmosophy. And it just, I've written books where things don't come together so well. I really think things came together in this book in the end in a way that's so tight that I've never accomplished before. So I'm really happy with that.
Yeah, it must be a thrilling experience when that happens, and likewise, if it doesn't happen, it must be so galling.
Yeah, it's terrible when it doesn't happen.
Terrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just for our listeners, Gilles Deleuze is probably the film philosopher who's most influential in setting up the very beginnings of the idea of film philosophy. I mean, there are some others, Stanley Cavell, etc., although I think he does it in a very, very different way. One of the main ideas you're taking from Deleuze is this idea that essentially watching a film is analogous to the way your brain works, the way your mind works. And so the screen is ultimately in your head, and that seems to be and correct me if I'm wrong, it's that right as the core sort of idea that you're taking?
Yeah, what was his not mantra, but the brain is the screen. I think
Right,
that was,
exactly, yeah.
I can't remember what the French is for that, but yes, that actually connects with Frampton's filmosophy and this idea of, which is guided by this idea of film thinking. He takes, impetus from Deleuze as well. Although, have you heard of Frampton or read filmosophy
No,
before?
no, I hadn't. No, I was very interested to hear that.
As far as I can tell, I couldn't find him. I wanted to interview him. As far as I can tell, that's the only book he's written. It was put out by Wallflower Press in 2007 or thereabouts. And I think he was a filmmaker of some kind. And to my knowledge, he's still around. But he wrote that book, and he called it a manifesto for, a different way of looking at film, and it certainly is. But then he just kind of disappeared, and I know that the book didn't resonate with a wide swath of scholars, among others. But any book that takes big, innovative swings, especially at that level, I really am drawn to. And I read that book. I'll get back to the film thinking in a moment, and the brain is the screen. So I think I reviewed it, geez, almost 20 years ago when it came out. And since then, I had always wanted to apply it on some level to something. I just didn't know what or how. And just a little background for the Kubrick book. I started out writing it for another publisher. It was published by Stalking Horse Press. But I originally wrote it and was under contract with, and there's no bad blood here, so I'll say it out loud, University of Liverpool Press, and who I'd published a book with prior to that, a monograph on Spielberg's Minority Report. So it didn't it didn't work out with that press, and it didn't work out specifically, I think, because they were not too keen on the creative liberties that I took.
Right.
They wanted something that shot a lot straighter than how I was shooting, which is fine. That happens sometimes. But I didn't want to change what I had done. They wanted a lot of editorial renovation, and that would have changed my whole sort of project. In any case, I'm very thankful for that. And I should say it's a great series. I've read. I think they have two books out now. The Liverpool University Press. It's the Kubrick Studies series. But that really, when I saw that series, I was like, I've been a fan of Kubrick for a long time, and immediately when I was thinking of it in terms of desire, I was like, this might be somewhere where I could apply Frampton's theory, and I did. And basically, he again, I don't want to say riding the coattails of Deleuze, but gaining volition from Deleuze, developed a concept of film as a method of thinking, wherein films and entire filmographies of filmmakers have their own manner of thinking separate from, the directors, the filmmakers themselves. Not just in terms of, the way in which viewers subjectively process and interpret films. His argument is that, they work like a brain. They work like a separate entity, an alien entity almost, if you will. And found that very appealing, not only in and of itself, but in terms of thinking about Kubrick's cinema, especially because so often Kubrick has been criticized for, I was just rereading my introduction this morning, for instance, being, let's say, misogynist.
Mm.
While at the same time, other critics will say, well, that's not true at all. He's, in fact, very much the opposite of that. I really think you can approach him as a moralist, an immoralist, or an amoralist. And there's plenty of evidence from his films to back up either of those arguments. So what the apparatus of filmosophy, and Deleuze allowed me to do was to kind of remove that scholarly maelstrom, I guess, of interpretation and look at Kubrick, at least, through my own perspective, with fresh eyes. So that's sort of how the whole film thinking works. I treated his oeuvre, especially with respect to the futurist cinema, through the film thinking of philosophy, and in effect, collapsed his entire oeuvre into that futurist matrix.
So you call this like the Kubrickian film mind, and then within
the
that,
KFM.
Exactly, the KFM, and then within that, the SFM or KSM.
So here's the creative
science
stuff.
fiction mind.
There's the KFM, the Kubrickian film mind, and then there's KSF, which is Kubrickian science fiction.
Right. Okay.
And then there's I mentioned things like the SFM, which is the Spielbergian film mind.
Right.
Excuse me, in talking about AI. I don't screw around with that too much. But those acronyms, run throughout the book. And, my thesis is my first sentence.
Science fiction.
I can't even remember it now.
Science fiction enabled Stanley Kubrick to become Kubrickian.
That's it. Science fiction enabled Stanley Kubrick to become Kubrickian.
And I've memorized that. So that's what impact it had on me.
Yeah. Okay, good. No, I wanted that. That was, I remember I wrote that sentence and I was like, all right, this is good. Because usually in introductions, I'll build up to a thesis and all of this, but I just put it right out there. And then just the whole book is unpacking that thesis.
That's what I teach my students. I teach academic writing a lot, and I always say, put your. I mean, it's something you learn as a journalist. You put everything at the top, because if an editor needs to cut, they want to be able to cut from the bottom and move up the page, and so your most important stuff has to be at the top of the page. And as academic writing is different, but I always say, why not just have your most original, interesting idea right at the beginning, and then evidence, then argument. But why should I read this? Well, the reason I'm reading this is because science fiction enabled Stanley Kubrick to become Kubrickian.
and what I mean by that is, this not only had to do with Kubrick's own desires as a filmmaker, but with censorship at the time that he was making films, and essentially censorship kind of lifted right after Lolita, I think it was after Strangelove. But the Lolita he made was not the Lolita, of course, that he wanted to make or that he could make. Because is that right? It was Lolita and then Strangelove, I think.
Yes.
Right. Lolita. And I believe it was the Motion Picture Association's MPAA rating code that was lifted I think it was shortly after Strangelove. In any case, Strangelove kind of set the scene for it started to build after Lolita. And Strangelove, I still don't tend to think of it. It's certainly not genre science fiction. It's more of an alternate reality apocalypse film. but still can be categorized as science fiction. And then he goes with 2001, of course, straight in all the way into genre fiction. Although I argue that it's also an anti science fiction film. Um, at any rate, when he got started, when he started dipping his toes, so to speak, into science fiction, for me, anyway, that's where when we say things like Kubrickian, because we can see evidence of Kubrickian in some of the early film noirs, for instance, The Killing and so forth. Even Fear and Desire, I think I start out talking about that in the book, which was his first feature, right? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's his
And
first feature-length film, self-financed and later disavowed.
right, that's right. Yeah. So we can see evidence of what he would kind of become. And for me, the Kubrickian, writ large, broadly speaking, just tends to be him, let's say, feeling more comfortable with the avant-garde and expressing himself through the vehicle of avant-garde modes. Whereas prior to that, he was a younger filmmaker, finding his way. And so I argue, once he hits Strangelove, there is the Kubrickian. And thereafter, it just snowballed.
Yeah, no,
And then I essentially argue that everything, all of the films after that, I make an argument that they could be in some way quantified as science fiction. But that sort of science fictional manner of film thinking that he establishes in Strangelove runs throughout the rest of his career then. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a part later on in the book towards the end where you're talking about almost a Balladian idea of everything is science fiction, because as soon as you get to a certain technological level, you're constantly inventing universes, and the technology is affecting you as a human being and the way you think and all the rest of it. I mean, like, you could easily I was thinking about this last night. I was kind of dreaming a little bit and going in and out of sleep with your ideas turning around in my head, and I was sort of thinking how Barry Lyndon could be like the film that they show David Bowman as he ages in the alien hotel room, and you know what I mean? And you could really invent a cinematic universe in which all the films that Kubrick makes also exist within the films Kubrick makes. So like in Clockwork Orange, in the shop, there's the record of the 2001 soundtrack in the boutique where he's buying his music. So, that's evidence that Alex could sit down and watch 2001: A Space Odyssey at some point.
Yep.
And even the drunk has that thing, all the people in the sky flying around in the stars and nothing for people on Earth.
Right.
Suggesting that it's all it belongs to the same universe. It's the same Kubrickian, as you say, Kubrickian mind. This also has the benefit of kind of, well, I think you've already alluded to, which is getting away from this idea of auteur theory or biography or anything like that. You can just focus on how these films sort of autonomously exist. You don't have to get into the nitty gritty of, well, actually, it was Tumbrel who did the special effects and Kubrick wheedled a credit out of them or whatever. So that's really useful. But I want to go back a second to the Deleuze thing, because I think this is a really interesting idea, and the idea from filmosophy as well, because it's sort of it really goes with what neuroscience has told us recently, which is we don't perceive reality. And I've actually heard neuroscientists use cinema and especially the sort of the technology of DVDs as an example of how the brain operates in perceiving things. Is we don't look out of the windows of the eyes and just see everything. Our brains project an image of what it thinks reality is, and our eyes check that it's accurate, and if it isn't, it changes which is what DVDs do. They don't, if the white wall doesn't change, it doesn't keep each frame recreating the whole white wall. It only recreates whatever moves against the white wall. So in that sense, your brain is, is the technology of the cinema, the technology of DVDs is doing the same thing as your as your brain is. So the analogy is not even just an analogy; it's kind of identical.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I don't know how in favor that sort of, this whole cinema as brain. There was a, I get the sense that it's kind of lost steam,
Mm.
that way of looking at things, at least within film studies, theory of film studies. But I'm still very much, I'm definitely with you. That's the thing. The thing is, and especially with this Kubrickian film mind too, our brain, of course, is always tricking us. We can't escape our subjectivity. I'm what we see is not necessarily what is. I mean, and holy cow, does that apply to the world we're existing in now, especially with what's going on with, well, let's say American politics. I
And
mean,
leave it at that.
right. I mean, but at the same time, everything's kind of like Ballard said, everything is science fiction. I'm writing a couple of books on Philip K. Dick now, and his big thing was, he played with reality. There was no grounded reality. Reality was completely fluid. You couldn't pin it down. And, that's an apt metaphor for the human condition. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
especially the cinematic human condition. One of my arguments, another argument in this book is that, we all, whether we like it or not, um, now have cinematic consciousnesses. Although cinematic is probably the wrong word as we move away from, film towards TV and streaming. And it's all a result of, phone culture. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I mean well, I think we're going to come back to this at some point. But let's head
sure.
into the movies because I think this is a way that a lot of people will be familiar with the movies, and so we can sort of solidify some of these ideas to some degree, or allow them to remain fluid, but pour over the wonderful molds that these movies. So we start with Strangelove, and as you said, Strangelove is a film which, to some degree, escapes easy categorization. It's not obviously science fiction. You could watch it as a war film. I remember
Yeah.
watching it and thinking that the footage of the outdoor attack was like real
Mhm.
footage that he'd just sort of edited into the movie, which I think is such a wonderful. I love those naive readings you have of a film when you're a kid, and you think, well, wow, that he's done his job, hasn't he? If that's what I genuinely thought.
Yeah, yeah. And he made a concerted effort to blend a docu-realistic footage with the crazy antics that happen in Strangelove, because in addition, it could be a war film, it could be a science fiction film, but it's also, of course, a riotous satire and comedy, slapstick comedy. So it's kind of crazy just in that way in terms of its multi-generic status. Um, Sorry, what
Well,
was the was
it was one of those dreaded more a comment than a question sort of
Oh, that's okay.
things. Um, but yes, no, absolutely. On that sort of dichotomy, you have that docu-realistic thing and the horror and the nightmare, but all the names are crazy Swiftian, Mandrake,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jack
Yes.
the Ripper,
And that's why I mentioned, so yeah, that's a good point of departure. The craziness in that movie starts with the way in which it blends genres. And that's why I look at that film. So I look at each chapter in the book is titled in accordance with the desire, the form of desire that I think that film embodies. So the one on Dr. Strangelove is pathologizing desire. The one on 2001 is
is weaponizing desire.
weaponizing desire. Yep. Clockwork Orange is neutralizing desire, and AI is customizing desire.
Right.
And so those are sort of the overarching ways in which I enter into my discussion of films. But it's particularly apt for Dr. Strangelove because the craziest thing in that movie, well, I was going to say is Dr. Strangelove, but then there's General Ripper. But Ripper is kind of, everybody is kind of a symptom of Strangelove's pathology. And I established that in my reading of that film, among other things. But then that in particular, I trace throughout the book. And Strangelove for me becomes a kind of ghost that haunts Kubrick's cinema after that and can be applied to all of the films thereafter. And I do that, with the films that I look at. So there's this operating insanity in Kubrick's films. But Kubrick, no matter what he's doing, there is some satire involved there, even in his most tame, sort of dramatic and subtler moments. He is commenting on the human condition again and again. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing that you've got there as well is the idea that we have a certain technological capacity and facility, and we create these things, but then these things constantly fail because our humanity is still the same. So we can design and we can build these weapon systems, but in the end, there will be madness, there will be insanity, and someone will just, unleash. And, I think you use this phrase, the fail safe will fail.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was one of his, the themes that I think that emerges in a lot of his films. This fear of machines, and especially of machines malfunctioning. Did you see it, of course, in Strangelove in 2001? The HAL malfunctions, to say the least. In A Clockwork Orange, the system is the machine that sort of malfunctions against the malfunctioning Alex. But he's a product of his circumstances and culture. And then in AI too, the humanity, actually, that AI is so interesting. And I'm really glad. At first I wasn't going to write about that, but it's so profoundly, dynamically comments in a retrospective way on the three other films that I just mentioned. And the big machine in that, humanity kind of becomes a cyborg. The metaphor for that are the AIs. But in the end, there is no humanity. Humanity's dead. The only thing that remains are its AI, which I argue is kind of, if we trace it, Strangelove's what I call his mine shaft dreams come true. That is the bomb coming true from Strangelove. Yeah.
Yeah, living in a sort of antiseptic world in which no human beings exist anymore except one
Right.
consciousness is sort of like where the Strangelove desire ends up pointing you, which is a form of sort of, I don't know, embrace of death, essentially. If you want to cure the world of human beings, that's the inevitable endpoint, right?
Yeah, and that's what Dr. Strangelove's all of. I mean, how we love the bomb. It's real scary, but there is something that it taps in terms of desire deep inside of us. There is a, I don't know. I even see it when I read, I don't know, TMZ about Diddy. I'm like, boy, this guy is evil. I can kind of feel the bomb. I feel like my own desires, there is a certain excitement there, right?
Yeah,
But at the same time, like, boy, this is horrific. This is just terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The monstrous is something that revolts us, but we can't stop reading. We can't stop Googling
Right.
to see what are the details. What did he actually do in these, what actually went on. That's why Epstein's Island is so endlessly fascinating, is
That
because
too. Yeah.
it's a black hole. But apparently, we're going to find out fairly soon. Who knows? Who
Really.
knows? If Elon has his way. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you make
But
the
the bomb
sorry.
is sort of the culmination. Oh, okay. Diddy and Epstein. The bomb is sort of the ultimate culmination of that very same kind of oppositional, emotional, stance, I guess, or whatever we want to call it. I guess, yeah, sure, it taps emotion, maybe theoretically speaking. Again, in terms of desire, I really, it was really, now I can only think of Kubrick in terms of desire and the way in which I've done it. But I do think it's, well, if nothing else, it was really useful in coming to new discoveries that I otherwise would not have come to.
When it comes to the next film, 2001: Space Odyssey, there's this really interesting idea that you have of the Kubrickian rule being "thou shalt kill," which is sort of the sort of order that is given to the moon watcher, the ape at the very beginning, or the hominid who will evolve into humankind. And it's another example.
Inverting,
Yeah, exactly.
thou shalt kill, of course, inverting the biblical tenth, or I don't know what commandment that is, but that's not my idea. I pulled that from somebody else, but yeah.
Right, right. But that's really fascinating. But what I one of the things I was sort of like I wanted to ask you, because this was a sort of question that popped into my head, and it's kind of connects to the idea of the brain mind and other stuff as well, is why view the monolith as a phallus and not as a vagina?
I think you could absolutely, as with everything Kubrickian, I think you can absolutely view it that way as well.
Right.
My reading in this, though, is all about the phallus with respect to desire. I mean, geez, you could invert what I've done in this book and read it absolutely the other way. I'm sure there's a reading there. What's your reading of the monolith as
Well, the reason I
feminine,
say
ultimately rather than masculine?
the reason I say that is because I think as a, I mean, it's obvious the thing like, okay, it's oblong, okay, and it's vertical, and you could say, okay, it looks like a penis because of that, which it kind of doesn't, because penises aren't oblong and they're vertical depending on your point of view and your mood.
Right.
But
That's true.
a woman, a woman's pubic area could be seen as vertical and roughly
Sure.
speaking that kind of shape if we're going to go very roughly with the shape. Also, they enter the monolith.
Yes. It's a
And
womb. It gives birth to a new form of humanity, the
precisely
monolith. Yeah.
it doesn't sort of do anything that it's not a functional phallus, if you like. I mean, you could say, well, it's a symbolic
Yeah.
phallus, and certainly, I mean, I'm not going to be a contrarian about it. The scene
Yeah.
where the monkeys are sort of worshipping the monolith, it's very, it's very obvious how it looks.
Yeah.
But it's almost as if, like as you were saying earlier about the fluidity of, you could see him as a misogynist or you could see him as anti-misogynistic and give a totally
Yep.
different reading. I think the idea of something like the monolith, the resonance of that idea is that it doesn't fit any one conceptual framework. It changes during the film.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could make the argument too that it is, the aliens who we never see. They
Mm.
are a manifestation of the impossible, yet they clearly are doing something. And I only know that I remember when I first saw 2001 long ago, not when it came out, I wasn't even born, but in the maybe it was the late 80s. And I didn't know what the hell was going on in that movie. I mean, I didn't have the intellectual or capacity to sort of process it. But I was really interested, and only after I read Clark's novel, and Kubrick and him sort of collaborated on that. Clark ultimately wrote it, but Kubrick was involved. Then the novel is kind of a guidebook to what's going on in the film. It contains a lot of info dump and exposition that, of course, isn't in the film. So, but one of the things about so we don't technically see the aliens in the book, but there's more about them. And so there's clearly something going on with them in the film that they have the capacity for profound change, which they bring to bear. But we could read them as you could read that monolith as neither masculine nor feminine, for instance. Just we can't see what it really is, just as we can't see who the aliens are. Um, and again, that goes back to the whole fluidity of everything. Yeah.
And this is how I'd connect it back to what we were saying about Deleuze and how, academics are can be quite resistant to that idea of the film mind and the film brain and whatnot. Is
Yeah.
It seems that they keep tenaciously a grip on Freud, even when like Freud in his major field of study has been
Yeah.
largely abandoned, and it always feels sort of like, okay, so you're not willing to accept this, which kind of people are saying this is actually how the mind operates, but you are willing to stick to this sort of more cultural. I mean, I think Freud's fine as a sort of cultural touchstone, a way
Yeah.
of think, you know, as a kind of a pretty good and adept literary critic. His writing on Hamlet is excellent, you know, and very influential. But it always interests me how he manages to hang on in Hollywood. Screenwriters, for instance, seem to use Freud a heck of a lot, rather unquestioningly.
I mean, he's even his psychoanalysis, it reads like literary criticism.
Yeah,
And there's been books actually written that make that argument and unpack it in great detail. I perceive him, I might even, I've mentioned it before, like Deleuze too. They're kind of like cyberpunk science fiction writers. Seriously, that's how I think of Freud. Holy cow, that guy. Like, I mean, his just his imagination. I mean, he think of what he did. It's incredible. I mean, now in terms of application, okay. I mean, in therapy and so forth. Well, yeah, okay. A lot of that's been discounted, but still, in retrospect, it's endlessly fascinating. So I understand why people are drawn to it. But in turn, and in using him to develop a theory or uh, read a text or something. That's cool as long as you're not taking yourself too seriously. And that's the thing. It's my experience, not just in film studies and with Kubrick scholars, but also with like I wrote a book on J.G. Ballard several years ago and got involved with the Ballardians. And now I'm kind of involved with the Phil Dickians, writing these books on one on A Scanner Darkly and the other one in his on biographical and autobiographical texts about Philip K. Dick. Um, all of these, like the Ballardians, the Kubrickians, and the Phil Dickians, they're all slightly different, and but they have very distinct ideas, and often will not be swayed from them. Whereas, I've my whole career, I've been kind of I float from one thing to the next, and I'm just very curious and interested. I always
you're a
want to
science
learn.
fiction butterfly.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a cyber butterfly.
But I'm always, well, I want to challenge myself. I want to learn new things. It just seems kind of natural. So I must say, even to this day, it's a bit perplexing when I'm confronted with certain scholarly rigidity, let's say, especially the likes of which I'm doing in Strangelove country. And so far, the response has been pretty good. But, well, I'll give you an example. An author friend of mine, actually, I've never met him in real life, but we've been corresponding for a few years. He got a copy and he liked it and he explained how he liked it, and then at the end he was like, yeah, but your methodology is shit, so but I still like the book. And he said, with one breath, he called it a tour de force, I think, and then he's
Uh-huh.
like, but your methodology is shitty, which is fine. But I think
But
I expect.
wait a sec, what methodology? Like you
Oh,
were
I think he
doing
was talking about
sample.
my creative methodology, yes, and using he didn't like because Frampton's filmosophy is inherently creative, not in the way that I am specifically, but one of the things, and this didn't resonate with me actually in filmosophy, he focuses on is how the emotional resonance, or rather the way in which films can elicit emotions in viewers and how we should use those emotions to read the films, that didn't quite resonate with me, but that's
Right.
one of the more imaginative flights he takes. Um, in any case, yeah, it always kind of boils down to that. And when somebody says, I think I mentioned this in the acknowledgments, it's like if somebody tells me you can't do it this way, this is no good. I'm going to do it that way times 1,000. For fuck that. And why can't we? I think that honestly, especially in this world, again, there needs to be more exploration of this nature. I
Absolutely.
really do.
And it seems
Yeah.
totally in fitting, it seems totally consonant with the subjects that you're studying as well. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
Philip K.
Yeah.
How can you study Philip K. Dick and say, no, you have to stick to one rigid way of looking at stuff? And it
Right.
even irks me the idea that somebody would talk with this sort of faux scientific social science word like methodology. It's like, I'm not doing sample studies. I'm not in a fucking lab. What's the methodology? You read the books, you watch the movies, and you think about it.
Right.
What else? I mean, you're dressing it up in a white coat and putting your safety goggles on.
Yeah.
Now you've dropped the F bomb. I can too. Fuck that.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move on to a film which I think you were really fascinated by, and it's a film that I find not problematic in the sort of capital P sense that it's used today, in terms of misogyny and what, although there is that too.
Yeah.
But I find kind of it doesn't get me the same way. It's my least rewatched of the Kubrick movies,
Mhm.
which is to say I've rewatched it a lot, but just not,
Not
to
as
the
much as the other.
exactly to not, yeah. I mean, Kubrick is one of those filmmakers. Any film that you're watching of his is your favorite film.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, you, oh, I don't think much of Full Metal Jacket, but when I'm watching it, he's never made a better film than this. This is the best film he's
Yeah.
made. Um,
You're so right. There's so few filmmakers that can do that. I mean, really, yeah,
yeah,
I absolutely have that same experience. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even again, people can say what they like about Eyes Wide Shut, and you make the point that a lot of people have changed. It's a film that the most people change their minds about. I think that film.
Yep.
So many
I mean,
people
and
watch
I
it and
did.
just, yeah, yeah, precisely. Same here. I remember watching it twice at the cinema and thinking, okay, okay, and then okay. And then when I got like a box set on DVD or something, I watched it again and thought, this might be my favorite Kubrick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't work out what the fuck it is. Um, so let's talk about Clockwork Orange. I couldn't
Sure.
see this film until the late 90s, I think, in any version
It
that
was
was.
banned.
Yeah, it was. I
Yeah.
rewatched it in a video from Holland with Dutch subtitles, really poor quality, which kind of made it look like a snuff movie. And in some ways, I think that's the best time I've ever seen it. I think when I saw it all cleaned up and everything else, then it sort of convinced me less at that
Yeah.
point. Where does this stand in your journey with desire?
So I should say that like Clockwork Orange is what got me into Kubrick initially when I was quite young, and the first abandoned book that I wrote. I wrote several abandoned books when I was starting out. Was a sequel to about A Clockwork Orange, including lots. The whole thing wasn't written in NADSAT that Burgess writes it in, but there was a lot of that. Um, so I came to the movie first, which led me to the book, and I got really into the book, Burgess's novel, and then kind of came back to the movie, and from there, that's where I expanded my Kubrickian horizon. It all stemmed for me from A Clockwork Orange. So in the book, rightly so, I think, to a degree, everything kind of collapses into that chapter in A Clockwork Orange, or on A Clockwork Orange, which is titled Neutralizing Desire. And The neutralizing comes specifically from the way in which Alex is reconditioned not to be violent, which is associated in, to a degree in the film, but more in Burgess's novel. It's associated with normative teenage behavior, that level of violence in that near future, which is essentially a manifestation of Strangelovian violence that is perverted or amplified or both. And incidentally, you can't neutralize desire. They try, and it fails in the end because Alex is then reconditioned, or rather, uh, uh, we come full circle. He goes back to where he used to be. And this has been written about a lot in Burgess's novel. The final chapter sees Alex sort of growing up. He realizes, oh, gee, I was just young, and that's why I killed and raped people, which is, let's say, dated. But Kubrick.
Well, I don't know. In the days of Andrew Tate and sort of the kind of moral panic which is going on about young men at the moment,
Yeah, that's true.
it's almost like we're back to the well, boys will, as you say in the book, Burgess's idea is more or less boys will be boys. They'll just be they'll go through periods of ultra violence and then grow out of it, hopefully.
Right. Yeah, we're experiencing, speaking of Freud, the return of the repressed in multiple ways right now.
God, you can't let go of Freud, can you? It's
No.
brilliant. I mean, I can see now how wrong I am. Come back, Freud. All is forgiven.
Um, but Kubrick removes that last chapter from his movie, which changes the sort of message because that moral, Burgess has a moral. The moral for Kubrick is not, oh, okay, he grew out of it. The moral is you can't escape this. You can't escape the bomb inside of yourself. That bomb's going to go off. You can try as hard as you want. It's going to get us in the end. And that, above all, is how the film sort of speaks to my how I view desire throughout the Kubrickian. Yeah.
And it's I mean, I always think a little bit like we've been talking already with Clockwork Orange, and in a sense, this has been the hints in terms of Eyes Wide Shut and to some degree Full Metal Jacket as well, is there's a generic sort of slipperiness about Clockwork Orange. Because, I mean, you can watch it a thousand times and forget how funny it is, for instance.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised that it's so much talked about as this sort of very violent film and everything. And I've kind of never really thought of it as that violent. It seems, I mean, violence is there and unpleasant violence is there,
Yep.
but it's not, it doesn't embody violence to me. It doesn't, there's no bits that I feel squeamish or, oh, ow, that looked like it hurt.
Yeah. And the humor is what drew me to it, first and foremost. And I didn't really perceive it as a science fiction film. It's certainly not a science fiction film the likes of which 2001 is, but it's set in a dystopian near future. But speaking of the violence, I'm on the exact same page as you. The thing with there are two, when he kills, breaks into the writer's house and rapes his wife, when he and the Droogs do. The scene in which they're in that theater and battling with Billy Boy and his gang, and there's that girl that Billy Boy was going to rape and runs off.
Which is a little bit like, a saloon fight in a Lee Marvin comedy western,
Over the top, right?
Yeah,
And that
breaking chairs over each other and stuff.
Yeah, he was riffing on that for sure, but in a cartoon-like way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then when he kills the cat lady with the penis,
Yeah.
the porcelain penis. Am I missing? Like, those are pretty isolated acts of violence in that. There's some other things. But I think at the time, again, ratings codes had just been lifted. So people hadn't seen a lot of that on screen, I'm assuming. At least, for a feature film of that nature. So I think that's why it collected almost overnight, such or not collected, what it was so taboo, and considered to be so transgressive. But if you think now in retrospect, I mean, it's quite tame, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
think of geez, in the 90s, for instance, there's so many natural born killers,
yeah.
you know. The end of that, I think they're running around the the jail with Tommy Lee Jones's head on a stick. And there's just extreme instances of violence mixed with extreme humor, mixed with animation. For me, Natural Born Killers is another version of A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, oh
Um,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah, uh, but yeah, again, and actually, Natural Born Killers, even you don't see a lot of that today. That could be made today, I think, and it would still be talked about as pretty transgressive, whereas A Clockwork Orange, not so much. So, in
Yeah.
its historical context, I think that's where it gains a lot of this sort of valence. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think there are films like Straw Dogs or
Yeah.
I mean Straw Dogs was remade. I never saw the remake, so I
It
couldn't
was
say.
okay. It
Yeah,
could have been
okay.
worse.
Right, okay. Okay. But I think
I mean, but the original's really, I quite like the original.
right. I mean, I saw, all the way through the 90s of films like Man Bites Dog and
Yeah.
Killing Zoe, the Tarantino films. People forget Tarantino films were, I remember watching those and feeling like, oh, I mean, the cutting off of the ear in Reservoir Dogs
Yeah.
was
I always go to the ear. Yeah. When
yeah,
you mention,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
these were, I think even if you watch them today, they still have a sense of danger to them. You
Yep.
know, David Lynch, I think post David Lynch, well, I mean, the latter part of his career and after his death, there's been this invention of David Lynch, the cuddly guru, the transcendental meditation guy. And
Yeah.
my experience of watching David Lynch films was like one of imminent danger and dread, just sitting watching them thinking, God,
Absolutely.
anything could happen with this guy. So when we get to design, we get to artificial intelligence, this is a film that obviously poses some problems because it's got mixed authorship. But I think you
Mhm.
argue very convincingly for its inclusion. And also the idea that now we're going to again another generic space. Really love the bit that you said. I think it was in the introduction that you say every Kubrick film is like anti the last Kubrick film. Every Kubrick film is like a response and a
Yeah.
almost like an aggressive act towards the one that's just come.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely. And with AI, so my understanding, and there's been a couple of books written on this. One was by Julian Rice. I think it's something like Kubrick's idea, Spielberg's film, which I lean on pretty heavily. Um, and Kubrick worked on it. He had the idea of making this film. It's based on a story by Brian Aldiss called Super Toys Last All Summer Long, I believe. So he had the idea for this movie for 2 decades, maybe, and talked with Spielberg for quite a while about it. And then in the end realized, and again, Julian Rice goes into all of this in his book, and I mentioned it to some degree. In the end, Kubrick's like, look, he saw Jurassic Park and he said, Spielberg's onto something here with the special effects. And, in the coming years, he's like, look, Stanley, Steven, why don't you do this film? Special effects aren't essentially for me evolved enough where I'd feel comfortable doing it, but what I've seen you do, take it on. And he did. And I'm not, well, he died, in 99, right?
Yeah,
Kubrick, right after, geez, right? Either
right.
right before Wide Eyes or Eyes Wide Shut was released or right
Yeah, he
after
just
they
finished.
wrapped.
He literally finished the final cut, and it was like a
Okay.
week, 2 weeks after, um,
Right.
reaching
Okay.
for his oxygen tank.
So I don't think, I think his involved, obviously there was AI came out in 2001. So when Spielberg was making that, Kubrick was gone. But again, they worked pretty closely for a while. And, at first in that film, I was like, oh, I can see where Kubrick is and where Spielberg is. for instance, Kubrick is Rouge City. That struck me very much, which I call the capital of Strangelove country.
Mm.
That struck me as exceedingly Kubrickian. It turns out that's exceedingly Spielbergian, at least according to what I read about it. The things that I thought belonged to Kubrick, Spielberg actually put in there. The flesh fairs, those Holocaust-like flesh fairs, that was Spielberg too. Whereas Kubrick injected the more sentimental parts into that film that, frankly, I didn't think worked as well.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, uh, but that's just sort of a personal fanboy sort of assertion.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's interesting that, but I think Spielberg often gets there is something in him I mean, you could go to the sort of the broken family theme or something like that, but he has a
right.
lot of like harsh moments in his film. Even the film like E.T.,
Absolutely.
when they go into the house and sort of start destroying it, there's a real sense of like fear and invasion, and it's the film isn't sentimental at all, in that moment. Or Close Encounters
Right.
of the Third Kind, he basically leaves his family and sort of drives them out. There's
Yeah.
no reconciliation, or there's no sense of his family turning up at the end and saying, "Oh, we understand what you want to do, Dad." He's just like, "No, aliens are bye." I'm off.
Yeah. 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 A lot of people that I speak with about Spielberg are very, very harsh. They
Mm,
really don't like him.
mm,
And I mean, when I was young, I've always loved Spielberg. Ultimately, quite a different filmmaker than Kubrick, but I can see how they would get along. There are a lot of alliances there. And even if we just reduce it to, they have different senses of style, but they are both. One of my theses in the book is that style is a way of seeing, and they both enact a style through a certain perception and, of course, a certain mode of desire. uh, at any rate, AI I mentioned this before, but for me, is in this book was a good vehicle to look at what I had done in those first three films in my discussion as a kind of retrospective. But it also, in the end, it really brings things together. Like I mentioned, where we are at the end of AI with, you know, da I describe what happens at the end of the film. We kind of pull out as if we're pulling out from a film set
mm.
after David, his mom is reborn, but they're both gonna, or at least she's gonna die within 24 hours or something, and then once and for all, the bomb will have its way. We have the specialists, the evolved AI that inhabit the world, and then there's David, and that's it. Humanity's gone. But they worship humanity now, just as as if we're Jesus and God or whatever. Allah. Um, so the bomb has, done its job. Strangelove has done its job. It's wiped everything out. Where we are at the end, when we pull out of that sort of, it's highly metafilmic when we pull out of that theater, because the house where it's shot in the end, it's made to look like a stage set almost. It brings everything for me anyway, in my discussion, to such a tight close. I was like, I can't believe it. When I remember writing it and coming to the end there, I'm like, I can't fucking believe that this worked out so well. It's all plugged in right here. The bomb has run its course. Here we are. I guess the future of humanity will be once and for all technological, uh, but we were made human by, if we think of it in terms of 2001, the technology of the monolith, which injected that desire for violence that we see in A Clockwork Orange into Moonwatcher. And all of that, was instigated by Strangelove in the first movie there, Dr. Strangelove. So there's that thread that just starts in Strangelove, builds, 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 very nicely concludes in AI. And that's, yeah, kind of it was almost not effortless or seamless, but Um, Kubrick's films, just as J.G. Ballard's oeuvre. I think I did pretty good in that book too. Uh, uh, J.G. Ballard's oeuvre and Kubrick's oeuvre too made it easier for me because there is such cohesion. There's almost a geometry there for both of them, where it's math. It just works out. Whether almost as if I felt like more of a vehicle to some degree.
Yeah, it's like music almost as a harmony that's going on that
Yeah,
you just
absolutely.
works between you
Yeah.
and the material. And there's nothing worse as an academic or as a writer or something, sort of feeling the resistance when you're pushing an idea and you think, oh shit, maybe the idea's
Yes.
wrong. I mean, that's what you
Yeah.
got to do. I think if you're honest, if you're pushing and it's not going in at a certain point, you got to say, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe it's just not, it's not, there's a reason there's not that ease, it's,
And I also think a lot about how constantly, to a fault, when I'm writing, because I don't just sort of bang it out. I write very slowly, but I just write every day. But I'm constantly thinking about reader response too, and how certain ideas, what effects they may have, and all of that. So that's an added kind of stressor.
yeah, no, but I mean that's understandable as well. So there's a sort of a question I really want to ask, which I was thinking of towards the end of the book, and sort of started thinking with the Clockwork Orange chapter, and went through, it's something that you refer to in the book as well, because you refer to the certain things. You say that Kubrick drops the ball when it comes to race. There's, with the exception of
Oh,
James
yeah.
Earl Jones, there's no one. Everyone's white in Doctor Strangelove. 2001 is kind of worse than Doctor Strangelove. You don't have a character who is, I mean, everybody is credibly white. It's not, they're not just white, they're eating sort of chicken sandwiches on the way to on the
Yeah.
moon. It's that sort of the white
It's whiteboard
bread.
day
The
for sure.
the
Yeah.
bread is white. Everything is white. When you get to Clockwork Orange, likewise, England was a multiracial country in the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
It had, uh, and uh, and yeah, AI. I'm not sure how much that applies to AI because you've got a different
There's a
sort
little
of,
more diversity there. Yeah.
and Spielberg himself is much more tuned to that sort of idea himself. He's
Yeah.
got children who are from different races and what have you. Um, but I was thinking the same thing in terms of women, because you're talking about desire,
Mhm.
and you're talking kind of specific. You specify, this is phallic desire, this is male desire, this is. So I was wondering, what about female desire? Is that a different type of thing? Is it the same thing? Is it how does that fit into the Kubrickian film mind?
Well, boy, that's a big question.
Is that another book?
Well, it is. No, it really is.
Right.
Absolutely. But you know, this is mostly a critique. What I argue is that, let's say, the Kubrickian film mind satirizes and critiques collectively through its cinema, specifically techno-masculine desire.
Right.
Women are support that critique, just in a way that they are almost entirely occupy supporting roles. I do make an argument though that who's the who's gosh, in Doctor Strangelove, it's the strongest female, I argue, in is at least in the futurist cinema. She's a secretary.
So
She's
Miss
George C.
Scott.
Miss Scott, yeah. She actually, the way she's framed, the sound of her voice, the way in which she supplements kind of George C. Scott. She doesn't have a lot of screen time, but that screen time is really powerful. And she is, again, framed for all intents and purposes in a position of great power as these monkey boys blow everything the fuck up, right? She is, and she's kind of, it's almost as if Kubrick is like, look, over here we have a strong female that is that is in complete contrast to everything that's going to issue out of it like something being born, right? Like like some sort of a Frankenstein being born. She stands in contrast to this techno-masculine mess that then unfolds from that spot. But to answer your question in general, it would be fascinating. A study of the feminine in Kubrick would be a study in not complete absence, but certainly in marginalization and near absence. And there's something to be said for that too, and ambiguity. I think one of the subchapters, forgot where, I say Kubrick enacts what's called or is propelled often by an engine of ambiguity. He creates scenarios where we can never be sure what's going on. And I think the feminine could easily fall into that space, but definitely, geez, now maybe I will have to write an article on that. Have you read a lot on how that's been
No,
approach?
but I haven't. No, I haven't really. But as you're speaking, I'm just thinking, like, how much of his cinema. And I agree with you. I was really loved the mention that you made of Miss Scott in the book, played by Tracy Reed, by the way, who was married to Edward Fox briefly in the 1960s, just for
Okay.
a little bit of extra detail. She has, like, you make the good point that when somebody phones for George C. Scott to come down to the war room, she also obviously has a relationship with this other guy on the phone as well, and so she's sort of like she's got her own little matrix going on that she's and she's perfectly able to play these. So there's no sense that she's
in control.
Exactly, she's not being exploited as the pretty secretary.
Right.
She's like, well, I got a couple of things going on that you don't know about. But I was also thinking about how the female works in something like Eyes Wide Shut, which is all about paranoia, and it's all about, the person who holds the cards in that film, the center of power in that film is Nicole Kidman, and she's the one who ultimately has the biggest gravitational pull and the biggest confidence, and all the insecurities are entirely Tom Cruise's and entirely Bill Hartford's. I don't know. I mean, like Wendy in The Shining, would that be, the revelation in Full Metal Jacket is that the sniper it's like the sudden presence of a woman in this masculine world of violence is sort of, how can we kill a woman? I mean, it's like, okay, we've been bombing kids for 3 days, but all of a sudden this young girl has sort of literally unmanned us, and I mean literally unmanned us because a few minutes earlier she shot the first person the sniper shoots is the black Marine who she shoots quite visibly in the crotch, a crotch which has been sort of shown as a sort of literal, again, a literal dick measuring competition. So it seems that it's not as though the absence is like the absence that you might find in some films where the filmmaker just isn't interested. It's just like he's the sort of filmmaker goes yuck whenever there's a kissing scene in a film. That sort of never grew up as a boy, has that same experience. It's much more structured than that. It's much more that women have certain positions and places, and those positions and places may not be traditional in any way. I'm not saying a woman's place is in this place or that. They might not be circumscribed or anything, and they might be very, very powerful, and they may be very, very disruptive in those positions, and they may comment on the whole film. Think about Paths of Glory. The last word of that film, apart from, well, the penultimate word, is Christiana Kubrick, then not Christiana Kubrick, singing a German song to the French troops and making everybody cry. And then Kirk Douglas says, let them have a few more minutes before they go and die, essentially. And she is like the powerful, emotional core of that whole film, the coda of that film. And she's practically the only woman in the film. So it's not as if she's accidentally the only woman in the film any more than Miss Scott is accidentally the only woman in the film. They're the only women in the film because they're going to carry a certain sort of weight in that way.
Now you have just mapped out your essay or book, you realize.
God
Seriously,
damn
like
it.
all of the women that you mentioned are foils for masculine ineptitude, aggression, pathology from those positions of power. Wendy in The Shining, for instance.
Yeah.
She comes off as like, just, she's very expressive, obviously oppressed. But he's crazy.
Yeah.
We see him go crazy. We see him lose it. Who wins in the end? She does. She saves her kid. She's
Yeah.
the strong one. She's the one in control, even though she seems out of control the whole film.
Yeah.
And I guess in this, from what you were talking about, all those characters that you cited, if we think about it in terms of them being in position and being in control, I mean, yes, absolutely. And it's fascinating to think about it because it's there. You're absolutely right, but it's so marginalized, you know, not just in terms of, well, especially just in the usage of women on screen, but that marginalized usage, which is why it's so effective, is so profound and powerful.
Mm. Mm.
Just in the way that you, I don't know, did you know that you were doing that, tracing it? I'm mad that I didn't mention some of that stuff in my book now.
um, I was kind of, I guess I was thinking about it as I was reading your book because as soon as I started thinking about it, it was like, okay, what about that and what about so I won't claim to
Yeah.
be like it's not off the top of my head entirely, but it's entirely down to reading you and thinking about you. I mean, and to go back to the one problem I would have not with your book, but with the Kubrick film line, is I think A Clockwork Orange kind of suffers from the absence of the woman because the only woman who you could really point to and say she has a sort of power to do this would be the cat lady. And she is the one who is killed. But that's the crime that sends Alec to jail. That sends so as a plot
Yeah.
engine, she's absolutely central, but or even like as a character, she's not like a victim with but in quotation marks. She's not frightened. She fights back. She
Yep.
totally gets who Alex is. You little shit coming into real people's houses. I mean, she
Right.
absolutely deconstructs Alex. You're just you're a made up, literally made up person.
Yeah.
But by killing her and by not having any sort of, and I'm not, you can't, this is a danger in any sort of cultural criticism is sort of like, to criticize a film or a book for what it isn't and try to in my version I would have had I would have made his mother more
Yeah.
important. I'm not saying that. It's just
No, not at all.
I
But
mean
that's what criticism's all about, though. It's supposed to facilitate more ideas and criticism.
yeah,
A lot of scholars are like, how dare you say that about my book or whatever. I love criticism and negative and good, whatever. I mentioned this at the end. It's like, whatever you think about Frampton's book, and I have something to say about A Clockwork Orange in a moment. Whatever you think about Frampton's book, for instance, good scholarship amplifies the critical imagination, and it allowed me to, see things in a new light. And if people take issue with my book or any book, good. That's what it's all about. So you take issue with it. What do you think about things?
yeah,
But the cat. So when I think about the cat lady, and I don't write about this, but just based on what you were saying, there is a woman thereafter that is framed in a very much in a position of power that is a consequence of Alex killing the cat lady when he is put on stage and they're demonstrating how he's now a robot and can't commit acts of violence and so forth. And that woman comes out on the stage, she's topless and she's literally standing over him, lording over him. And as much as he reaches up and tries to touch her breasts, but he gets that death-like feeling and so forth. So I don't know. Maybe we could read that as an extension of him killing the cat lady, that woman, that position of power, clear power that she's put in is sort of haunted, or Alex is haunted by the cat lady in that respect. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. That works. That definitely works. And I mean, maybe that's the problem with Alex. Maybe that's the whole is the inability to see desire as something mutual. I mean, he's not. If we see desire as it's like it's like there's only one porn category. If we see desire only as violence, only as the expression of masculine power, then it's an extremely narrow version of desire that we're actually looking at. And there's, spooning, for instance, cuddling.
Cuddling, yeah.
There's a whole bunch of other stuff. It doesn't have to be
Sure.
it's Alex. And the fact is that is
But I take, go ahead.
I think that's actually included in the critique of the film, as you describe the dream sequences have and the fantasy sequences are all sort of bad Hollywood, and they're all. I mean, I was really interested to watch. I'm not sure if have you ever seen Funeral Parade of Roses, the Japanese film?
No,
It's well
I
worth
haven't.
watching. This is a really influential film for Kubrick for A Clockwork Orange. I forget the director, but I'll cut out the bit where I say I forget the director, and I will say
I
it.
should probably know that.
Oh no, it's a kind of obscure. It's Funeral Parade of Roses from '69, so really contemporary with Clockwork Orange by Toshio Matsumoto, and
Okay.
it's a queer film. So it's unusual in several aspects, but the reason it's interesting in terms of it uses a lot of the similar techniques to Clockwork Orange, speeds up sex scenes,
Mhm.
uses art in a way that is very pop and very of its
Oh,
time, but
okay.
very bold and very experimental. And Kubrick was a great admirer. But I'm also interested that he's watching gay cinema and queer cinema
Yeah.
as a way of thinking, okay, just before you make this film about a young man, in this sort of very heteronormative, transgressive, but via violence rather than transgressive, transgressive, but in a very recognized way.
Yeah.
He's looking at this other cinema which is showing desire in a totally different way and totally transgressive in a way which isn't, which is about queerness. So yeah, that's also sort of. I mean, it's a long time since I've seen it, but Funeral Parade of Roses is a really interesting point of
I'll
comparison.
definitely check that out. I
Mm.
mean, ultimately, I think he was interested in doing like me. It's hard for me to kind of. I always have to. I want to do something new with every new book that I write, and I want to outdo what I've done before that. And he seems to be guided by that same desire. And speaking of desire, yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, there's all kinds of different ways in which desire manifests itself, channels itself, and so forth. But I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, my view of desire comes directly from Deleuze and Guattari in the book. It's either Anti-Oedipus or A Thousand Plateaus, wherein they say that one sentence, there is only desire in the social and nothing else, which is to say, desire is kind of everything. You remove desire from the human, well, what's left? Well, there is no social, there is no society, there is no culture. All of this is a result of desire. And I would argue, at least for the present day human condition, and you know, going back to the Industrial Revolution, desire connected to technology. And in the case of Kubrick's futurist cinema, its relationship with masculinity.
Mm.
at
Yeah,
least in terms of how I'm approaching the material.
absolutely, absolutely. Wow, wow. What a conversation, man. We've got into the we got into the nitty-gritty and we went
It's
into the
great.
metaphysical and we went into the physical. Um, Listen, one last question that I ask
Sure.
everybody, David, which is, can you give us a recommendation, a film book recommendation for our listeners?
A film book recommendation?
Sure,
What am I reading now? So I'm going to say, here, give me a sec. I'm going to go get it.
sure.
Is that all right?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
No, I don't know if I don't know if I'd choose this book if I had more time to think about it, but just off the top of my head, it's called Ends of Cinema.
Oh, good cover.
I think it was published in 2020. Uh, University of Minnesota Press. It's just a collection of essays. Um, I won't try to pronounce the editor's names. Ends of Cinema, though. I do cite it in my book. Specifically, one of the essays has to do with how cinema is, since its inception, late 19th century, consistently been dying and then being reborn, at least in terms of how it's been processed by film critics. So, but there's lots of interesting essays in the collection that take innovative and new looks at cinema. Yeah.
I've just written an article called well, no, it's about not the end of cinema, but end of cinemas. Um,
Oh,
well, I feel that's the more urgent problem. I think cinema is going to continue the way music continues. It's an art form, but
yeah.
actual theatrical spaces where you can go and sit and watch movies, they close every day, and they close for
Yep.
very specific economic reasons. And so you don't need to save cinema, but you could actually save cinemas, by. I mean, often they're failing for their own self-sabotage of the industry. They tend to have this thing of becoming their competitors, which is not a good way of competing. So for instance, I was talking to this French cinema owner. He owns a string of cinemas, and he was saying, we don't compete with Netflix, we compete with restaurants. If someone is leaving the house, they're leaving the house to go to the cinema or restaurant. And so we've got to make the cinema better than the restaurant. And so what we do is we have food
Oh,
in the cinema, and that way people can come to the cinema, eat, and watch a film. But you're not going to get good food in a cinema, not in the way you will. If you want to eat, you go to the restaurant. So the cinema offering
yeah.
food is not really that solution. And then the studios think, okay, what we do is we're against the streamers. We're competing with the streamers. So we're going to make films which are similar to what the streamers are doing. We're going to become like them. So we're going to make episodic cinema. We're going to make sequels and loads of stuff like that, and we're going to tie it in. But if that's all you can see at the cinema is the next Marvel movie or the next Star Wars movie or the next whatever, then I can stay at home and watch it on Disney Plus or
Right.
the streamer. You've made yourself obsolescent. You've made yourself redundant. What cinemas need to do is make films that you can only see on the cinema, that are original and new and thoughtful and exciting, and suddenly there's a buzz about them. That's why horror is always, outperforming other genres, is because the
Yeah.
biggest thing in horror is kind of an idea. If you have an idea that
May I ask where you think, where do you see cinema going in the next 10, 20 years? Is it just more, will it be all streaming or will we go down the same road where there are less movie theaters and so forth?
I think the Hollywood version the Hollywood and sort of European version would probably be, investment in places like IMAXs, and then there'll be like that is something very different. That's something you can't get at home with you're not getting that. So I think
Yeah.
that will probably proliferate, but that's very expensive to film and to
Yeah.
to produce. So it's, you know, So that I think that's one possible thing. I think world cinema is really healthy. I think American cinema, American studio films are really unhealthy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, you know, you have Barbie and Oppenheimer come out the same year, and suddenly you've got record-breaking box office. So you don't really need that many films in uh, for Hollywood to turn a profit. The problem is you don't have the proliferation of really high quality drama and really high quality at the cinema. That's not there in terms of an American Hollywood model anymore. That's in TV. And the same thing's true of Britain. Britain doesn't create a really broad variety of film. It creates two or three really good independent films a year, maybe two or three Paddington style films a year, and that's it. You know, I mean, compared to say the French or the Germans or the Spanish, you know, or even the Italians, will will have just much more turnover. You know, the Italians, the French, they make loads and loads of comedies, you know, which never travel internationally. And they're not very good, but they are a cinematic way of talking to the nation, you know?
Sure.
So lots of people go and see them. And, you know, that doesn't happen. There's no English. All the British cinema is always got one eye on the across the Atlantic. You know, the biggest ambition Britain has is to please America. And culturally, it's airstrip one, you know? So, and that sort of hamstrings it as an independent culture, I feel. France doesn't need to worry about selling to England. It's not going to America. It's not going to sell to America. It's going to be in. You could make the most entertaining action movie in the world, and if it's in French, it's going to be looked at as art house. You know,
Yeah.
it can literally be
Yeah.
John Wick, and it'd be like, oh, but it's in French, so it's like it's art house.
I'm very curious to see where sort of, I don't know, is this art house blockbuster? I don't know what it is. Something like A24 films. I'm very curious to see where what direction those go, and will it become, like everything else, kind of homogenized and all of that, but or will it, because to some degree that's happened a little, but for my part, that's where I find, with I don't even know if I mean, they say it's independent, but it's pretty big now. It's at least connected with studio. Yeah. Um, but I perceive it as kind of an art house studio form.
That's a brand.
And that's kind of where I gravitate if I'm going to do that sort of thing. But, good things like that, they tend not to last very long.
Yeah, I mean that's around. Look, Miramax when it started was this independent distributor with a lot of power. You know, Quentin Tarantino, and
Yeah.
they got foreign films, foreign language films into American cinemas, and they got them in. They got Benini and whatnot, winning awards at the Oscars and things like that. There are business models that can work. A24 is very successful at branding itself. Mubi
Yeah.
is has making that crossover now because ultimately they recognize there is an audience. People do want serious cinema. People do want to go to places and watch movies. You're always gonna have a large market for that sort of thing. It's just finding an economic model which will be sustainable because ultimately you're always relying on a certain diet of a certain output and turnover. And because films are so expensive to make, you don't need many to fail before you're in real trouble. It's very easy
Yeah.
to overextend yourself. I mean, what was it? New Line? New Line had the Lord of the Rings films and then went bankrupt less than a decade afterwards, It's like, how could you possibly go bankrupt after making the Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings films? Surely you had enough money but Golden Compass, they didn't make the follow-up to that because they basically, they were in the toilet financially.
Hmm.
It's sorry, go ahead, dude.
No, I'm just spitballing now. Do you happen to know what I have two daughters. We were talking, and we watch a lot of movies together. Do you know what happened with those not Tolkien, C.S. Lewis movies? Two of them were made, and then they just stopped.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I
Yeah.
think
Was that for similar reasons, a studio problem? I
I think
mean,
they're very expensive movies, and they I don't know if what was it, Prince Caspian was the second one. I think they might have just got to the point where they they the thing is, right, this is because I've just written an article on sequels, and I was going back to the 1970s and why didn't Spielberg want to do Jaws 2? And the economic model used to be that for the sequel of any film, they would give you two-thirds of the budget that they gave you for the first film. And the calculation was you have the first film, your possible audience is everybody. The second film, your possible audience is everybody who saw the first film. So you're already getting a fraction of a fraction. Okay?
right.
The first one, you're getting a fraction of everybody. The second one, you're getting a fraction of everybody who saw the first film. So we're not going to give you the same budget because you just don't have the chance of getting that much money back. So we'll give you a fraction of it and we'll take the money and run, and if, Charlton Heston doesn't want to be in it, don't worry, we've still got the monkeys. And if Peter Sellers is asking for too much money, don't worry, Alan Arkin can play Inspector Clouseau as well as Peter Sellers. And so that's how they'll do. If Spielberg doesn't want to do Jaws 2, doesn't matter. We'll get some no name, and as long as we got Roy Scheider, and in number 3, it doesn't matter. We'll just say it's his son, and in number 4, it doesn't matter. We'll just say it's his wife, and so forth and so that's how sequels used to be done. And then nowadays, the sequels are inflationary. They cost more than the original, and the budget goes up. You have more and more and more. But unfortunately, you actually still have the same problem that you had in the 1970s, which is your catchment audience is the people who went to see the first one. Who is going to go and see, Iron Man 6 if you haven't seen Iron Man 1 to 5? You're not going to get people
Yeah.
who've never seen an Iron Man movie going to see Iron Man 6. And that's why the Marvel movies are beginning to bottom out. I mean, Captain America, who even knows who Captain America is supposed to be anymore? It's wow, we've got really into the weeds here, haven't we? Are we still doing a podcast?
Okay.
Okay, David, thank you so much for being my guest on the podcast.
Thank you. It was great to be here.